Hello everybody, welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where today, if you've seen the last video, you'll be familiar with this map, and if this latest YouGov poll is anything to go by, might need to start making some changes to this one. But the point of today's video is actually this little project that I've embarked on. It's my potential election pendulum, which features a list for all four major sort of partisan groups competing in this federal election, that is Labour, the Coalition, the Greens, and basically the rest, or the Independents and others. And what I want to go through is basically how I've ranked every competitive seat in descending order. So the way it works is here, if Labour are to win 85 seats, my projection is that Griffith will be the 85th seat that they win, and then as we go down, each seat becomes a little bit sort of easier for them to win. Or same thing with the Coalition. I would project that Dobell would be their 85th seat, and then as it goes down, these are the seats that I think they're more likely to win. Same with the Greens, and then with the Independents as well. The current incumbent member, or their current incumbent member's party, is represented by the colour. And here I've got some other sort of little indications here. Like for instance, there's Labour's current numbers, that's majority 76, 70, which I think whichever party makes 70 probably wins government. And then the Coalition numbers down on 55. So you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm using the actual sitting MP. So I don't care if the AEC redistribution has flipped the notional margin, but I'm also counting those who have defected this term or changed allegiance or party or whatever. I'm counting them as an independent, as opposed to, say, Coalition in the case of Clare and Monash. So without further ado, I might just go ahead and run you guys quickly through the list, just make some brief sort of explanations and comments. But ultimately, this was really hard to do because of the impact of third parties. This probably would have been a much more simple exercise like 20-30 years ago, but alas, here we are. So firstly, in the Labour column, Griffith, I think they'd have to be having a good night to pick up that, or Deakin, and indeed Fowler. It's definitely in play if they're having a really good night, especially in those more kind of multicultural outer suburban corridors, but they've definitely got a battle on their hand. I also have Leichhardt up here in the mix, especially with that LNP candidate raising a few eyebrows, and then a bit further down I've got them picking up Sturt, and in fact if they're going to retain 78 seats as they currently hold, I would actually predict Sturt would be one of them. So then we go to some of the ALP's tough holds. So that would be Aston, Gilmore, Bennelong, and Patterson. So Aston is a seat that they didn't even win at the last general election. They won it at a by-election, and I think we'll look back and realise that that was actually quite not a freak result, but a bit of an outlier, and something that would only have ever really happened in a by-election. Gilmore, Bennelong, Patterson. For a long time, I've thought that the Bennelong Liberal candidate was relatively strong, particularly with the Chinese community. That might still be the case, but he's not getting the best media attention right now, and his campaign has made one or two missteps. So potentially that's one that we could push down the list, and that could be one that's actually very competitive at the moment. But until I see something a little bit more solid, I think I'll leave it where it is. Gilmore, pretty decent incumbent, but pretty strong Liberal member trying to unseat-her, or candidate I should say. And then in Patterson, I just think the trends are really not the Labour's friend in this part of the country, and they don't have the best MP to sort of buffer them against those swings. So then we've got four kind of wild card seats that Labour would do pretty well to hold, but at this stage they're pretty much in the hunt to do so. So Bullwinkle is tough because they don't have an incumbent to defend it. But they are doing reasonably well out west, although perhaps not particularly in this exact part of Perth. Then in both Lyons, Lingari, and indeed in McEwen, these are seats where a strong candidate or a strong incumbent MP can have an outsized impact, I think. Although, again, trends are against Labor in all of these seats, so any sort of national swing away from them presents a bit of a problem, particularly in McEwen, where the Victorian Labor brand is still very much struggling. But, with strong candidates, they're definitely well within a chance in all three seats. So then we'll keep moving. Wills, again, sort of tricky to try and see where these potential Green seats actually fit within the whole list, but I've slotted it in at about 72. That feels right to me. Chisholm, it's similar to Bennelong in many ways, but it's got a lot more margin to play with. The sophomore effect might be slightly more pronounced there. SRL, maybe it's not as unpopular as I think it is, particularly in the eastern suburbs. So it could be one where Labor just have enough to hang on, but the pressure's definitely on. Then in Wirrawar, I think it's ripe for a sizable swing to the coalition, but with their national positions slipping the way it is, I would definitely be a bit concerned. So then, really, I should draw attention to all four of these seats because they all appear side by side. I think it's around these four seats: Chisholm, Wirrawar, Robertson, Tangney. That's where I think these are the seats that really decide who forms government in the end. They're not all necessarily the same sort of electorate. Tangney and Chisholm, somewhat comparable with the professionals and the Chinese Australians, but Robertson's more sort of middle white Australia, a little bit older. Wirrawar, it's more that younger family, outer suburban multicultural kind of outer growth corridor. But I do think that at the end of the day, whoever wins the most of these seats is going to win government. And at this stage, I think Labor's probably winning all four of them, whereas maybe a month and a half ago when I was producing the first prediction maps, I think I had the Liberals winning all four of them, and thus I had them at sort of 73 seats. We'll keep moving. So Brisbane, I'm fairly confident that Labor wins this one, but if they're not having the best night, the Greens stand a pretty good chance of winning it, or even, as we'll see a bit later on, maybe the Coalition on a good night can pick that one up. Hunter, again, it's similar to Patterson where there's a bit of a trend, but this time the local Labor MP is probably going to provide a little bit more of a buffer against a margin that's a little bit larger because of the redistribution anyway. So I think they'll be safe there. Richmond up against the Greens, sort of hard to know how it fits with McNamara, particularly with the whole open ticket drama with Labor, but I would think, well within their first sort of 70 seats for both of them. Parramatta, I actually had that going blue in my first map or two, but I think it's clear at this stage that Dutton's just not appealing to that sort of crowd with the a bit more of that sort of public servant, sort of professional class moving in, bit of gentrification perhaps. Then Bruce and Hawke in Victoria, I think. Although there's a lot more margin to play with for Labor in Hawke, I think they're liable for a bigger swing in that particular part of Melbourne. But either way, they're having a pretty bad night if they lose either of those seats at this point. I would think Franklin, maybe that's a bit of a hot take. I'm just sort of concerned about how the salmon fishing policy plays out with one of the few Climate 200 backed independents that's running in a Labor seat. I'm not exactly sure how it shakes out, but I'm really interested to see. Maybe I've got it a bit too high, but I just have a bit of a feeling that something's going on down there, and that there is a chance that he could make the two-party count, and I think he would harvest really strong preference flows from both the Greens and perhaps from Liberal voters as well. So then we move down. So Reid, Boothby, Solomon, Blair. These four seats were sort of, the kinds of seats that if the Coalition were having a great night, it would sort of determine how big their majority is. But for now, they're pretty much off the table. Solomon could be like a bit of a sleeper, just with the way the NT election went. But at this stage, I think Luke Gosling's going to be okay. Cooper looks like the Greens don't really have a chance there. Shortland, Dobell, Pearce, these are sort of outer suburban seats that maybe the coalition had half a chance in, maybe to win one if they had a particularly good night with that outer suburban working class cohort, but they appear to be well off the table at this point. And then, these are more these kinds of middle Australian seats where Labor have these big margins. Again, maybe the Liberals would have been able to snag one of them on a really good night, but that just doesn't look likely at all. And then, down the bottom, this is all off the table. So we'll keep moving. We'll have a look at the coalition. So at the top here, as we said, it's these kinds of long shots that, as I said, would determine kind of how big their majority would be. I've got Reid in there as well. And then we start seeing some of these teal seats as well in order. So Kooyong appears to be the one that they're kind of most likely to get, followed by Goldstein and McCullough. And as we go down, Curtin will be there as well. Brisbane, on a good night for the coalition, particularly one where they poll quite well in Queensland, or if they have sort of more of a Turnbull style resurgence in the inner metropolitan seats, that would certainly be on the table, but that certainly doesn't appear to be what's happening. Then Hawke, Parramatta, Bruce, some of these seats that I had for Labor in the early 60s, my contention was always that the outer suburban areas was where the Liberals were going to pick up the seats that they needed to move from sort of minority to majority government, as well as those teal seats, and those are those examples there. Hunter got there at 72, and I think that pretty much lines up with where I had my original map, with Bruce sort of being a toss-up at around the 73 seat mark. Again, it's those four sort of pivoting seats, the really important ones. So then I've got a few like third-party ones. So Cowper, which I think is under very heavy independent threat at the moment. Ryan, that was my 66th seat as of my last map. And then Curtin, which is pretty much on a knife edge at this point with the way the Liberals are polling nationally. Here we've got, again, those more kind of wild card peri-urban regional seats where the incumbents sort of play an outsized role. To get into 60 seats, I think they have to make sure they hold sturt. The market seems pretty convinced that they will. I'm not quite so convinced. I think maybe, I don't know what exactly it was, whether it was the news poll aggregate that put South Australia at 50-50. Not sure I quite believe it. Partisan, I've had this theory that it's very much trending to the Liberals and the ALP don't have the right incumbent to fend them off this cycle, but they're going to have to have at least some sort of national trend or state trend towards them just to pick it up, I would think. Calare, that's looking a little bit precarious. The Nats have been in expectation management and sounding pretty somber on it for quite a while now, so it could be a really interesting one. But Bennelong, Gilmore again, and then Aston a bit further down, seats that the coalition really need to flip, or Peter Dutton's definitely not going to be surviving as leader. And then more third-party ones, so Wannon and Bradfield, which, there are reasons to be pretty bullish on the independents there. It depends what kind of a night it is. It could be the case where the Liberals actually pick off a couple of these seats up here, but then lose seats like Wannon and Bradfield. Really hard to know. Again, really hard to order these when you've got sort of competing trends and different challenges. But please comment your thoughts if you've got some ideas on this front. Leichhardt, so we're really getting down into like low 50s territory for the coalition, and at this point, the national polling isn't that dire, but you sort of feel like if the trends continue, this could be feasible outcome. Monash, even more. Maybe I've got more a little bit too high there. Doesn't really sound like the Liberals are going to lose this one, but you never know. Maybe Labor could come from nowhere and win it with Gooden sort of playing a bit of a spoiler role. And then we've got a handful of coalition seats, including Dixon, which a few of you have been asking me about. No, I don't think it's in play, but we did have that UComs poll out today with supposedly a pretty large sample size, but can't help but feel that UComms just tells whoever commissioned them what they want to hear. We'll quickly move on to the Greens. So they've got their 4 seats where they are currently the incumbents, and then I actually think they're a pretty good shot of picking up Wills to the point where it's actually more likely than them holding Brisbane. And I think Wills and Ryan, you could almost swap them, but at this stage, with the way the coalition's falling out with sort of women and working professionals and that sort of thing, I think maybe the Greens have a better chance of hanging on in Ryan than picking up some of those like inner northern sort of older European voters sort of in that northern part of the Wills electorate, which they would need to do. Again, we flagged that McNamara and Richmond, a bit hard to order, very different types of seats. I think just in Richmond, that area is trending towards them, whereas in McNamara, I know they did really well last time and the result was a little bit closer, but I'm not necessarily sure that area is the kind of area that's trending towards them. Cooper was sort of their last target, which doesn't seem competitive, and I know that from what I understand, they are launching a pretty decent campaign in Fraser, but that might be sort of more setting it up for the future or just based on some of the overlapping state results from 2022. And then as you go north, I don't really think there's, like, the chances are quite remote that they'd pick up any of these seats. So then we'll have a look at the independents. I might start from the bottom, that might be easier. So Clark, Kennedy, Mayo, Wentworth, Warringah, all perfectly safe, I would think. Warringah, Zali Stobel hasn't faced an opponent who really kind of represents the area well from the Liberal perspective. I mean, the ground really shifted under Abbott's feet, and then they put up, what was her name, like Catherine Deves, who just wasn't a good fit for the electorate at all last time round. So I don't actually know who they've pre-selected this time, but if it's someone sort of more moderate who kind of gets the area a little bit better, maybe if it's not such a good night for the Teals, it could get close, but she's won twice now, quite comfortably, so it's a pretty big call to say she's in trouble. Indi, Liberals are giving it a pretty big crack. Maybe issues around connectivity, the regional fund that they've announced, that 20 billion, roads, some opposition to renewable energy across the electorate. That might hurt Helen Haynes, but probably not enough for her to lose the seat. Then Fowler, as we mentioned, if Labor are having a good night, it's definitely in play, but have they really done enough to win back the voters and offset Daly's potential sophomore surge? I would think not. Then we've got these 3 Teal seats. I've talked a little bit about them, whereas McKellar, maybe early on it looked like it was in a bit of danger, but not with the way polls have been going recently. Goldstein, I should say, I think the area itself probably lends itself more to the Liberal Party than any of the other Teal seats necessarily, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure Zoe Daniels really done anything that would make you think that she's necessarily in trouble. Whereas in Kooyong, Monique Ryan is a little bit more of a divisive figure, and she's obviously had that recent controversy. Then Cowper, which I definitely rate as being under significant threat. The issue of connectivity is definitely a big one. The Nationals primary is already below 40 from last election, and I think that Kaz Heiser's campaign is just going from strength to strength, and she's going to be really hard to hold off. Curtin, I still think the Liberals have their nose in front, but maybe that's a bit of a hot take. Maybe Kate Cheney's done enough. Particularly with the way polls are going in WA, the state election, they didn't really get those big swings to the Liberals that they would have needed to make them feel confident here. Clare, that really complicated 3-way race. Still think the Nats are probably favourites with, just with that large field and the potential lack of preference discipline, especially with Kate Hook. Supposedly running an open out of her card ticket. Bradfield, Wannon, you could swap them around just as easily. I probably wouldn't complain. Monash, that's the last one I think where the Liberals are under genuine threat. And then here they become a little bit more speculative as you go up. Some of them are making their second attempt, for example, in Groom. Flinders, I've heard a bit of talk about Flinders. Then there was some poll with Forest which had them like only 1% behind, but again, I think any polling published by Climate 200 I'm a little bit skeptical of. Cool, so I think that pretty much covers it for today. Yeah, please let me know. I'll pop a link to that document and chuck it in the description, and you guys can have a bit of a closer look. Please let me know your thoughts. I sat and thought about it for hours, and I'm still sort of thinking, like, I hope I didn't make a terrible mistake and miss a seat, or you guys might have some better local insights or some different ideas about how to order it, and I'd be really interested to know what you guys think. But it's another thing that I can keep updating as we go along, and yeah, we'll just see how things pan out. So thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content and you're new. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and as always, please comment your thoughts. Thanks everyone, have a lovely day.